Hello, I'm Toycat and welcome back to our second channel video. So one of the things that makes the United States of America such a unique and successful country is the fact that it has, since the very beginning, held a presidential election every 4 years. This means that instead of other countries where there is often a power struggle, some form of war and revolution, kind of like the one that started this country in the beginning, there has always been a peaceful transfer of power every 4 years that has meant that power can transfer from leader to leader, from party to party, and indeed from movement of people to movement of people without having to have these expensive and unnecessary rebellions or unnecessary wars or anything along those lines. Instead, the people can just decide who should be leading them at any given point in time, and this means that since the beginning of the country, there have been 58 presidential elections, and over that time, we've ended up at president number 45 today, which might make you think, oh, so this is president number 45, therefore there have been 45 people acting as president, right? Fun fact, that's not actually true. This is entirely irrelevant to the video, but fun fact, president number 22 and 24 are actually the same person, Grover Cleveland, because if you serve non-consecutive terms, you actually count as two separate presidents. So now you know, there's your crazy fact of the day. By the way, this video is sponsored by Skillshare. We'll talk more about them later. But today's video is actually all about crazy facts of the day, because if you look at the party system and how it's developed over just the last 58 elections, you can see how, again, this transfer of powers happened in quite interesting ways, where we've gone from having the Federalist or the Orange Party to the Green Party to the Blue Party to the Yellow Party to the Blue Party to the Yellow Party to the Blue Party to the Red Party to the harder Red Party to Blue to Red to the modern day party system we know today. And yeah, the interesting thing about following this chain is it seems like there have been a lot of therefore opportunities where power has been tried to transfer from one party to another, and indeed a lot of opportunities where it does. You can see the fact that this bar has changed color so many times mean that different movement, different parties, different values have controlled the United States at various times, and therefore it's interesting to look at these elections, and we'll be doing so using, of course, again, the Wikipedia pages for each of them, and it's really interesting to do because, again, it gives you a really good summary of what happens with each vote, and it's a great way to look at any country's elections if you just want to get a vague overview. Again, this is the problem with, I want to mention, because, again, anytime Wikipedia comes up, there's always going to be that person who's like, haha, it's not a reliable source, but it's a great way to get a, you know, I guess a shallow, a first dive into a topic, and then you can dive into there from later if you want to, which is why I'm going to give you 5 kind of brief overviews of elections using the pages if you want to read more about them, because I want to start with the very first presidential election, the one that led to George Washington being in charge, because, yeah, the interesting thing about this one is it was the only presidential election which took place over 2 years. Instead of being the 1788 election, it was 1788 and 1789, so a 2-year election, because back in the day things took a lot more time. Also, they started it at the very end of the year. And the other interesting thing about this election is when you look at the electoral map, one, I mean, we're missing a lot of states, right? I mean, because it's the original 13, of course, which also means the flag looks like this. And, you know, isn't that wacky? I think that's wacky. But also, you can notice how a couple of states, including New York itself, didn't actually, you know, at that point, actually have any votes to thing, because they didn't ratify the Constitution in time, and therefore they didn't have any electors in time. And it's kind of wacky that, like, oh yeah, in the first presidential election, of the 13 states, 3 of them didn't have any votes. Also, of the ones that did vote, if we look at the actual votes itself, there were 2 major coalitions of, like, the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists, but all of the votes went to George Washington regardless, which, again, today you'd find it quite suspicious if any democratic nation had 100% of the population vote for one person, but that's what supposedly happened in 1788 to 1789. I can't really confirm, I wasn't there, but yeah, every single electoral vote that was actually registered at the time went to George Washington, and he became the president. He also, like, probably could have became king, but, like, he decided he wanted an actual transfer of power, which is one of the things that I would say led to the success of the US today. Yeah, their first election, it really doesn't resemble the current ones in any way. It was back when the president had way less power. It was just to have some form of ceremonial figure. Of course, that's changed a lot since then, and one of the greater examples of that is a very recent election, such as 1992. Because, again, we're talking about interesting presidential elections today that you might find interesting as a way to learn more about the future, because the past always holds more keys than looking at 2020 and being like, you know what, I think I know all about this just by looking at the last one. No, when you look into the further back things, you can start to see, like, oh yeah, here's one of the ways that, like, a, you know, Team Blue got in charge, despite there being a, you know, an incumbent in charge. You know, this was the last time that an election was won. The last time to this day where an incumbent has lost an election. George H.W. Bush was the last president, you know, to actually be incumbent, have a second term, run for the second term, and lose said second term. And the reasons for that you can debate. He promised he wouldn't have any new taxes, and then he pragmatically decided new taxes might be a good idea, but he broke a campaign promise, which fun fact, not an ideal thing to do. And also, Ross Perot was the most successful third party that has existed in the US ever since then. So yeah, 1992 was very notable for having an incumbent lose, and also for having a third party run and actually be successful. He made it into, most states' actual ballots, which it's weird to me that you have to have a certain success margin to even be written on the ballots, but America, two-party system, am I right? So yeah, that's very interesting. And you actually can argue these two things are linked, because although Ross Perot was an independent and drew voters from both sides, he drew more voters from the red side than he did from the blue side. And this is called the spoiler effect. You can see it all sorts of time. There were, only 43% of people voted for Bill Clinton, but as a result of the fact that the other 57%, roughly, was split between the red and between the independent, or now purple, because he invented the Reform Party since then, and it's purple, but it's not really related to him, and I don't think he's a member of that party. But yeah, long story short, because of the fact that between these two parties there's 57, but because it was split, it meant that 370 goes to the blue. And I'm not trying to say, I hate when people are like, so therefore, logically speaking, never split the vote. Don't vote for what you believe in, vote for the lesser of two evils. It does definitely say that there is a really clever way that you can split the opposition just by making two parties for them to go between. And yeah, if you want to win an election, but not many people like your cause, all you gotta do is this. Also, this was one of the last times the Democrats won an election, literally the second to last president in 1992, which is quite concerning, you could say, looking at those numbers. But yeah, also, so this was the point which started the current system where, oh yeah, Bill Clinton won 2 elections, then George Bush won 2 elections, then Obama won 2 elections. Who knows what's happening in 2020? But you get the point that, like, it started that trend, which looks like it might continue. Who knows for sure? Might be broken, and that would be an exciting first, right? But yeah, 1992, very interesting election for so many different reasons. Also, only one state had an actual majority. It was always pluralities besides, I want to say it was Arkansas. If you go to that state, Bill Clinton won 53% because it was his home state. And yeah, there's a lot of other slight weird anomalies, but this is the start of the modern day election map where you can see clearly blue states and red states that pretty much transfer over to today. Again, mostly. Whereas if you go back to, say, let's go back to 1948, this map is not one that's very recognizable. I think we can all agree. If you look at this map right here, you can see how, like, oh yeah, what's with the... This is not a map I recognize that this happened today. If this was the map of the 2020 election, everyone would just have questions like, so about that. And not just in terms of the blue-red split, but also in terms of the fact that the electoral votes are way out of whack compared to today. So, yeah, again, just looking at the difference between 1992 and 1948, you can see how, one, California more than doubles its electoral votes. It more than doubles its share of the population. Texas goes up from, literally 25 to 32, which is quite significant as well. The West Coast goes from, again, fairly minor. Like, you can see the huge differences here, and yeah, basically, big change from east to west has happened in just the last 40, 50 years, which you can see in this map. But also, it's notable because this was the last time the blue party, I don't know why it always has to come to the blue parties. Again, just the interesting things that have come from elections. It was the last time they had a long streak, and it's the longest streak that's happened in the last 100 years for either party, because if we scroll back literally 4 elections, you can see how Franklin D. Roosevelt actually won 4 elections in a row. There was kind of a rule that you shouldn't be in for more than 2 terms, but I mean, he also, World War II or something along those lines justified it. I'm not here to justify past presidents and how many terms they served, but that was interesting by itself, that like a president served 4 terms, then his vice president, who had to take over because he died, managed to get another term. 5 terms for the same party is very rare. That's 20 years of rule by the same singular party, which is, again, unheard of in modern day politics, right? But the other interesting thing about it is if you look, Thomas E. Dewey actually ran in 1944. He was the closest of, Franklin D. Roosevelt's actual election wins, even though he only got 99 electoral votes, which is pretty low. But yeah, this was one of the closest ones. It was one of the first ones where it actually was kind of close, as opposed to just, kind of wiping it out almost entirely. And it's also interesting because Thomas E. Dewey, who was the governor for New York at one point previously, he was quite a likable Republican figure at the time, but he did not win the election in 1944, and yet went on to run in 1948. These days, it's very, very, very unheard of for a president to lose an election and then run in another one. That's, again, the last time that happened was like Nixon, I believe, who lost against JFK, then later became a president. And yeah, the fact that this happened, and then also the fact that he was guaranteed to win to the level where, if we scroll down a little bit, because again, just a little bit of a deep dive, look how many things you can learn if you want to. But it's funny because he was so assumed to win that the Chicago Daily Tribune had a thing like saying Dewey treats Truman because they were just that short time of printing. Like, yeah, the opinion polls are looking at this. Even Truman was sure he'd conceded, but because opinion polls weren't precise, because opinion polls are never perfectly accurate, they're only ever accurate to the degree of the, there's always sampling bias and stuff like that. Opinion polls are only a very good estimate, they're never a perfect estimate, which is why you have pictures like Truman holding a picture of a newspaper saying Dewey defeats Truman, because it didn't happen, and therefore the news is wrong. Fake news starting back in 1948, am I right? That's the key takeaway from this one. So, other interesting elections you might want to look at. 1984 was interesting, which, 1984, fun, reference right there. But second of all, this is an interesting one because look at that country. That is a red country with one blue state. And interesting, if you look at the blue state itself, you can actually see how, even in the state that was the blue candidate's home state, one of the bluest states in the country, it was 49.72 to 49.54. Literally, this state was won by fewer than 4,000 votes. And it was the home state, and it's literally Minnesota, which is why Minnesota's always, fun fact, the state that has gone the longest without going red, I believe, at this point. But yeah, if we actually look at the map, it's wild, it's crazy. It was 525 electoral votes to 13. This is the last time that there was a real wipeout in US elections, and it's really interesting to look at for that reasons because again, this even goes against a lot of the narrative, a lot of the kind of easy assumptions you can make that like, oh yeah, well the easy way to win is you just, you target the swing voters or whatever. And maybe that's how this one worked here, because again, the Walter Mondale actually ran a pretty tragic campaign if you look into it. Maybe that's what just happened, the campaigning didn't go back bad enough. Or maybe you can look at this and say, oh, even though there's a lot of really wacky policies and a lot of things that people look back at and say, oh yeah, Ronald Reagan was so unpopular, this is not a map that shows an unpopular man. And it's super interesting to me that like that rewriting of the history of like, oh yeah, he basically lost. He won every state besides Minnesota. And there hasn't been a president since then that's even come close to this. It's always been contentious. We've never had an election where literally 20% more people voted for one than the other, which again, to me, signals this real worry of people vote for the lesser of two evils, but now both parties are such broad churches containing such wildly, different groups. You can think about how different right voters can be. Think about how different left voters can be, from the kind of centrist left that call them champagne socialists to the working classes to the to the people who are just in it for the social movement. When you think about how diverse these parties are, it gets weirder and weirder that the fact that even a 20% difference is unheard of in the modern day and hasn't been heard of since 1984. Also, it was a Republican from California. Literally, California went red. Obviously, all the states went red, but think of any blue state you can imagine, and it went red in this election, and went red by a pretty significant amount too. Look at this map of California, and you can realize just how fast the party landscape can change. And that's, in my opinion, this shows how you actually win a US election. Take the lessons we've learned from all the elections besides the first one, where there's nothing to learn besides hey, George Washington, isn't he a lad or something? But if you... If you look at these maps, you can see how each of these elections shows to some extent that oh yeah, you really want to start you want to attack new states that aren't really up for for grabs really that way. You want to kind of get a new strategy that gets a whole new group of people on your side. You might alienate some of your existing people, but for example, this is why it's smart for voters in one category to alienate people in their states they're already going to win, to try and gain over the people in the states they might not win already. Having a bunch of voters grouped up in South Carolina, for example, as I imagine, 48%, didn't really help George H.W. Bush. What he really needed were the swing voters in states like, again, if we look at the California, it was already pretty blue by this point, but if we look at a lot of these swing, states like I'm sure Ohio, if you look at it, it's you needed 2% more of people there. Waving off a train's not going to do it for you, George Bush. You're going to need more than this, and you're going to need to win over some of those Ross Perot people. And yeah, fun fact. Also, by the way, can I go back to 1992? Notice how he won Florida, didn't win the election. Wow, look at that. That's me. The Purge is wrong about their analysis of elections. But yeah, 1984 just goes to show you need to attack different people in different places, sort of, or just win all the states by having a bad opposition. Who knows for sure which one it is. But yeah, it makes you question a lot of things, and also is very interesting to me that you can weigh different issues in that way, just by being super strong. Even though the economic policy might not have been, it doesn't stand up to any There's a lot of it, like the taxation cutting and actually making taxes fairer, that had the justification of supply-side economics that we know isn't really a thing that works today. But the fact that, like, the national defense thing was strongly in Reagan's court, and the fact that there was a tricky situation otherwise, and the fact that Mondale was seen as so weak, these things add up to this map. But we've got one more election to show because it's a 5 video, because when you do things on the internet, we talk about 5 things. And I'm surprised I didn't lead with this one, because the 1844 presidential election, I mean, look at this map, like, oh, it's kind of, the US is kind of getting there. How many states is there here? Wow, we got a decent number of them, right? So one, it's interesting because the map's kind of expanded. A 2-party system has started to form, although it's around the Democrats and the Whigs. But the Democrats are kind of more like Republicans at this point, and the Whigs are kind of ish Republic. It's the party system changes a lot. Look into it if you want to. There's been like 5 major, like, 2-party coalition systems in America. But the other interesting thing about this map, besides like, the map's finally started to get there, is the fact that in 1844, 2 people fought. It doesn't really matter about them 2 people, in my opinion. Like, it's somewhat interesting because the Texas annexation was like, a big, like, should we add another state over there? Also, what about, should we manifest destiny all the way to the West Coast? Should this map over here one day become this map over here? They have to ask these questions of themselves. But they also have to ask the question, or one of the questions they almost had to ask, was, what if a literal religious prophet runs in our election? And you might say, don't be silly, Toy Cat. A religious prophet? What do you mean? Jesus is running it? No, what I mean is Joseph Smith genuinely ran for president in 1844, and this blows my mind. This sounds like a fake thing. I've had to confirm this was real several times now, because Joseph Smith, the prophet of the Mormon religion, as you probably know them today, he wrote letters to both of the major presidential candidates, to Henry Clay and to James Polk, and he's like, hey there, buddy, how about you tell us what you can do with the Mormons, and then we'll get the Mormons to vote for you. And both parties were like, we don't need the Mormon vote, we're good. And he was upset by that, so he decided to run for president himself. Because he's a religious prophet. I think if we remove the religion part of his thing, because I don't want to upset the Mormons. Actually, I'll upset the Mormons. Regardless of whether he was a real prophet or not, and you could assume that he wasn't by looking at the facts, but facts aren't what religion are based on, so it's fine. But if you look at the interesting thing of, like, if you take that away, he was clearly a very eccentric man that believed in everything he said. He didn't, even though there was a lot of, like, there was clearly a lot of things that he said that were for personal gain. There were a lot of things he said that clearly had a lot of benefit for the people that followed him. So yeah, he had a big gang of following Mormons and a lot of people in his little group, and he wanted to protect them. And he's like, I can run for president. I speak to the God, which he obviously thought he did. Obviously, a lot of people think they do that. And he's like, I'm going to run for president, and he's going to make me president one day. And the thing is, this would have been a wacky election if he'd have just actually ended up being one of the 3 candidates. The way that would have split the vote, the way that would have done so many things would be interesting. However, super sadly, the reason that it didn't end up working is because he was shot. This was at the point where the Latter-day Saints, as they're known, had some whole issues, and he didn't actually end up, like, he died, is what I'm trying to say, before he could actually, Smith was assassinated prior to the election, which meant that he never actually got votes for him, because by that point there was only 2 candidates. But imagine a world where a religious prophet, the founder of a religion, General Joseph Smith, I don't know why it's General Joseph Smith, imagine where Joseph Smith becomes president of the United States, and that is crazy, right? Can you imagine that world? But then here's the thing. It was very unlikely he would win. Imagine a world where your religion, which 12 million people right now do follow Mormonism, ran for president and lost. How does that even factor into your plans for it? I guess, if there's any religion that could deal with that, it would be the Latter-day Saints. But it's very interesting to me that the 1844 election had a religious prophet, the founder of the Latter-day Saints movement, the person who is, if you go to Utah, Salt Lake City, their giant church has a big thing of Joseph Smith there. A lot of things are named after him. This is their guy, literally founded a whole religion about, Americans being, Native Americans being, white and being... how Jesus lived in Jackson County, and all these ridiculous, not ridiculous, all these alternative facts. Wow, that's a real thing. He could have been a president, or he could have ran for president and lost. I can't believe that this is true, and it's wacky. I mean, actually, if you don't know Joseph Smith, I always recommend reading into him. He's a very interesting historical figure, regardless of whether you believe the things that he said or not. But yeah, 1844 election, so sad that he died. You know what? Me and the Mormons, we have a lot in common. We're both sad that Joseph Smith died before the 1844 presidential election. And yeah, I don't know. It's kind of sad. Also, fun fact, he ran something called a Reform Party, which, to tie this all back together, notice how Ross Perot eventually refounded the Reform Party. Am I saying that Ross Perot is actually... yeah, wait, let's get them together. Am I saying that Joseph Smith and Ross Perot are actually the same person? I mean, I'm not saying they're not the same person. You can see, looks like he's aged over those years, doesn't it? Yeah, just saying. So yeah, fun fact with Toy Cat. Now you know that, yeah, the 1844 presidential election, kind of wacky. Oh, also, because as a result of James K. Polk, who decided Manifest Destiny was his thing, again, the Democrats wanted to expand across America and kill the Native Americans. But again, those Democrats, not the modern day ones. But because he won and because Manifest Destiny was his thing, his running mate, George M. Dallas, is the reason that Dallas County, and therefore Dallas City in Texas, is named after him. So if we go right now to Google Maps, apparently I was in Afghanistan last time I looked at this. If we go to Texas, you can see how the two largest cities are named Dallas, named after the vice president at the time. Wow, how crazy. And then also Houston, which was named after Sam Houston. Sam Houston was not only... Again, everything ties in together. History repeats itself. Sam Houston was the first and the third president of the Republic of Texas. In fact, yeah, Texas had 3 presidents, and 2 of them were Sam Houston, who is now the namesake of the 5th largest city in the United States of America. See, history repeats itself, and that's why Joseph Smith is going to run in 2020. He's going to sweep all the states, and he's going to show you who's boss. But yeah, no, thank you very much for watching today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. Again, I know, like, I feel like I feel like introducing people to, like, places they can learn stuff is a great thing. This is why I love using Google Maps and Wikipedia for my videos. Either that, or I'm lazy and I'm justifying it by saying, oh yeah, something about learning or whatever. But yeah, I love the fact that there's so much information out there at your fingertips, and hopefully I've given you a place where you can learn some more if you want to. And if you don't want to, then good news! Today's video is sponsored by Skillshare. Skillshare is the all-in-one learning platform where you can learn things without having to have a guy on the internet tell them to you. And yeah, would you like to learn some things? Go click the link in the description and you can be taken to Skillshare. This is honestly, like, if we remove the fun little sarcasm on this one, Skillshare is actually a pretty great website because of the number of courses they have, about the number of different things they have. I learned a little bit about video editing from there, but you can also learn about just, you know, structuring your thoughts and how to do that. You can learn about all these different skills that are actually useful in super small bite-sized segments, like, again, 2 minutes at a time, easy to consume just for a little bit and know you're going a bit further forwards. Skillshare does a really great job at helping you learn new skills from all across the spectrum of different skills you've learned. I've used it personally, and I can recommend that you do so using the link in the description. If you do click that link, you'll get 2 months free Skillshare Premium, and you can do all of that because you're obviously thinking like, oh no, that sounds expensive, all those thousands of skills. 2 months for free, clicking the link down below, and then you can enjoy all these things. And if after 2 months you like it, you can pay, and if after 2 months you don't, you don't have to. I don't know if I meant to say this in the ad read, but you better believe I said it anyway, because I actually think Skillshare is a great site, and thank you to them for sponsoring this video, and thank you to George Washington for creating the United States of America, if for the only reason that without this man, this stunning fella, we would not have the United States of America as we know it today. There would not be the YouTube you know today. And also, I wouldn't be able to make videos about the presidents because there'd be no YouTube to upload it to, and there'd be no presidents to make the video about. So, yeah, thank George Washington for this Skillshare sponsorship, and thank all of you for watching, because I hope you have a great day. Second channel, vaguely care. Goodbye.